Sir, you're being detained for trespassing on your own property. That's almost what the officer said until I handed over my deed. See, this queen bee had been tormenting our whole lakeside neighborhood for months, dialing the police on anyone who dared exist without her blessing. She threatened to sue me for $50,000, filed bogus reports, and even tried greasing county staff to get me pushed off my land. The twist? She had no clue I owned the $800,000 mansion she was renting. Picture first light over Silver Pine Lake, pine sap scent blending with low morning fog. Then blue strobes start splashing across my grandfather's old cabin. Tires grind on gravel as two cruisers roll in, and there she stands, Belinda Cartwright, planted on her mansion's deck in a neon pink bathrobe, pointing at me like I'm some criminal mastermind. What would you do if someone called the cops on you for fishing on your own shoreline? Tell me below. Where are you watching from? I'd bet half of you have your own HOA nightmares. My name's Lucas, and 3 years ago, I thought I'd found paradise. After 2 decades in military logistics and a divorce that felt like being run over by a tank piloted by my ex's attorney, I inherited my granddad's cabin on Silver Pine Lake, Minnesota. Population 3,200, where the biggest drama used to be Mrs. Peterman's cat swiping fish from the neighbor's docks. The cabin isn't fancy, a 1960s A-frame on 2 acres of pure heaven. Each dawn I'd wake to loons calling across glass still water. I'd step onto dock boards polished smooth by 40 Minnesota winters and breathe air so clean my lungs forgot 20 years of diesel haze. The place smelled like childhood, old cedar, pine needles, and that soft metallic tang of lake water at first light. For 2 perfect years, Silver Pine actually lived up to its name. 47 places set along 8 miles of shoreline, a mix of blue-collar lifers and summer folks, all keeping to one sacred rule: wave when you pass, help when someone's in trouble, and mind your own business the rest of the time. Then, Hurricane Belinda made landfall. She bought the biggest eyesore on the lake, an $800,000 McMansion that looked like someone airdropped a suburban Dallas house into the North Woods. In her first week, she introduced herself to half the shoreline by pontoon, always in blinding white capris and cardigans vivid enough to flag down aircraft. Sweet as artificial sweetener on the surface, but her eyes were as warm as January ice. The morning everything shifted. I was on my dock with coffee that tasted like liquid calm when the low growl of an overpowered pontoon sliced the quiet like a chainsaw through silk. "Yoo-hoo! Hello there, neighbor," Belinda's voice carried across the cove with all the charm of a tax audit. She nosed up to my dock with a smile that would make a used car closer proud. "I'm Belinda Cartwright from the executive estate across the way." "Executive estate? Lord help us. I'm here on official HOA business," she declared, flashing a manila folder with the theatrics of a game show prize reveal. The Silver Pine Lake Homeowners Association has adopted updated aesthetic standards, and I'm afraid your rustic setup isn't meeting our community guidelines. I set my mug down so hard it rang against the rail like a bell. "What Homeowners Association?" Her plastic grin cracked just enough to show teeth. "The one that safeguards our property values from declining influences. That aluminum boat has to go. And frankly, the fishing gear scattered around makes the area look like a bait shop exploded." My so-called declining influence was a 1995 Lund that had hauled in more walleye than her floating living room ever would. The scattered gear was my grandfather's hand-carved rod holders and a tackle box older than she was. "Lady, this place has been in my family since before you were born. There's no HOA covenant on my deed, and there sure won't be." The mask dropped clean off. Her voice went sub-zero. "We'll see about that, won't we, soldier boy?" She hammered the throttle like she was fleeing a scene, throwing a wake that slammed my dock hard enough to spill my coffee. The stink of unburned fuel and pricey perfume hung in the air like a threat, muddying the clean pine smell until it turned my stomach. Watching her windows glitter in the sunrise like a predator's eyes, that old field instinct kicked in, the one that kept me breathing through 3 deployments. This wasn't just a neighbor spat, this was a campaign, and I had the sinking sense I'd just been drafted. 3 days later, I found an envelope taped to my front door like a ticket from the underworld. Inside was the most elaborate fiction I'd seen since my divorce decree. Silver Pine Lake Homeowners Association violation notice screamed across pricey letterhead in blood red type. Apparently, I owed $500 for failure to maintain dock aesthetic standards and had 30 days to comply or face extra fines and possible property liens. The document looked impressive. Stamps, case numbers, legal-sounding phrasing designed to make most people panic and cut a check. Too bad it was worth less than the paper it wrote it on, though most folks wouldn't know it. Time for some reconnaissance. The Maple Ridge Courthouse basement smelled like old leather and dashed hopes, where dust motes drifted in fluorescent glare like tiny ghosts of paperwork past. I'd learned in my Army days that the best intel comes from folks who've been filing forms longer than you've been breathing. So I befriended Darlene, the 70-something county clerk. "Another HOA victim, hun?" she whispered, sliding out my parcel file with hands that trembled from arthritis. "That Cartwright woman's been here 6 times this month, asking about enforcement authority and lien powers. Between us, sweetie, she doesn't know her elbow from her ankle about property law. My deed was crystal. No covenants, no restrictions, no HOA authority whatsoever. But that's where my old logistics instincts kicked in. Always check what the opponent is actually doing while they distract you with theater. Belinda's Silver Pine Lake. Homeowners Association existed all right. Incorporated 18 months earlier with exactly 12 members out of 47 lake lots. In legal terms, they had as much control over my land as my neighbor's cat. But while cross-checking ownership records, my radar started howling. Several shoreline parcels had recently transferred to Cartwright Holdings, LLC. A quick online search exposed the truth. Our self-anointed HOA queen was running an unlicensed vacation rental racket, flipping quiet cabins into party pads for Twin Cities visitors. The woman scolding me about standards was the one shredding them. I remembered something my grandfather said. "Before you fight City Hall, figure out who actually runs the town." Smart man. He also taught me that most county records are public. Titles, business licenses, covenant filings, all free to search if you put in the time. Wild what you learn when you do homework instead of just barking threats. Armed with that intel, I decided to gauge community sentiment with some targeted social media recon. Facebook may be where brain cells go to nap, but it's also where you find out who's paying attention on your street. My post was simple. Has anyone else gotten violation notices from the Silver Pine HOA? Purely for educational purposes. My phone lit up like a fireworks plant. 8 different residents DM'd me, each with a Belinda saga. She'd been working the shoreline like a legal intimidation twister, menacing widows over bird feeders and young families over mailbox colors. Janet, a retired librarian with indexing skills that could make the CIA cry, had been logging everything in a 3-ring binder. Tom from the marina sent photos of Belinda's bounced checks and unpaid fuel tabs. Even 90-year-old Florence chimed in with notes about odd, late-night activity at Belinda's so-called family rentals. I spun up a private group chat called Silver Pine Truth Squad, because if you're going to battle crazy, you might as well embrace the comic book branding. That evening, my phone flashed an unknown number. Belinda's voice oozed through like honey spiked with industrial solvent. "Lucas, darling, I saw your cute little Facebook post. You're making this unnecessarily hard on yourself. Just asking questions, Belinda." Neighborly curiosity. "Oh, sweetie, you really don't want to go down this road with me." Her tone dropped to that register some people use when they're about to ruin your credit. "I have connections you wouldn't believe, and I will absolutely report you for harassment and cyberbullying." The line clicked off, leaving me staring at the screen and wondering what sort of connections a rental hustler thought she had with local law. As twilight settled over the bay, I sat on my dock listening to gentle taps of wave against worn planks, breathing air that still smelled like freedom and Friday fish fry. The sunset turned everything gold, including the Truth Squad homes glimmering around the shore like the watchlights. Belinda had made a fatal assumption. She picked a fight with someone who actually gathers intel before stepping into a fight. If she thought Facebook drama would scare me off, she hadn't studied veterans. We don't retreat. We adjust, improvise, and occasionally overthink until 3 a.m. while planning 17 backup plans. Tuesday morning brought a visitor. Tim Harris from County Code Enforcement, wearing the expression of a man headed for a root canal. His pickup crunched up my drive at 9 a.m. sharp, because apparently Belinda believes in punctuality when filing bogus complaints. Mr. Lucas, sorry to bother you, but I've got to follow up on reports about dock violations and an abandoned vehicle. Tim looked embarrassed, which told me all I needed to know about the quality of her allegations. I poured him coffee that tasted like actual coffee instead of the battery acid they brew in municipal buildings, and we walked down to inspect my supposedly criminal dock. Tim measured twice, checked his clipboard, and then shook his head like a guy who just had an hour stolen. "Between you and me," he murmured, "this is the 23rd complaint from the same address in 6 months. Lady's got the county on speed dial." That's when he let something slip. Belinda had tried to palm him a $100 bill during their last run-in, calling it a consulting fee for creative code interpretations. She wasn't just playing neighborhood tyrant, she was testing small-time corruption. My grandfather always said, "You judge folks by how they treat service workers and public employees." Belinda's playbook was simple: intimidate or buy. That evening, the Truth Squad attended Belinda's emergency HOA meeting as observers, about as democratic as a North Korean ballot. The gathering was in her mansion's great room, a space so aggressively staged it looked like a beige and gold showroom exploded. Only 6 people bothered to show, mostly property managers from her rental web who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Belinda unveiled an elaborate PowerPoint titled "Safeguarding Our Community Investment," complete with pie charts on property values and photos of non-compliant homes that coincidentally belonged to people who'd refused to join her HOA. Janet, bless her librarian soul, took notes like she was documenting war crimes. But the real intel came when she noticed Belinda repeatedly checking an expensive watch and glancing toward the kitchen. During a bathroom break, because nothing says professionalism like a pit stop in someone's living room, Janet followed and overheard a tense call. "I told you the payments are coming," Belinda hissed. "These people are more stubborn than expected, but I've got new strategies. Legal pressure, code enforcement, whatever it takes." The puzzle pieces clicked together like a mosaic of red flags. This wasn't about standards or values. Someone was squeezing Belinda financially, and she was scrambling to manufacture cash through harassment and pressure. I'd seen that pattern before in uniform. Under strain, people make worse choices until they cross lines they swore they wouldn't. My answer arrived sooner than expected. While digging into her attorney, the same guy who'd mailed me that thunderous cease and desist, I found his practice focused on foreclosure defense and debt collection. Not exactly the lawyer you hire for neighborly disagreements unless you're already drowning. So I did the sensible thing. I filed my own complaint against Belinda for harassment, false reports, and abusing county resources for personal vendettas. 2 could play bureaucracy chess, and I'd had years of operating inside military red tape. Then I pushed one step further. Using the property manager's contact from the rental listings, I reached the actual owner of Belinda's mansion. Turns out, Northwood's property management was very curious to hear about a tenant's creative lease interpretations and unsanctioned business activity. Sheriff's Deputy Ruiz, who had been tracking the complaint pattern around our lake, pulled me aside after I submitted my counter-report. Off the record, he said, leaning against his cruiser while evening light scattered diamonds across the bay. "We're documenting everything. Nothing criminal yet, but she's skating a very thin line and we're watching." That night, sitting on my dock with the soft percussion of water against wood and distant laughter from a real family cookout across the cove, I realized Belinda had miscalculated one core thing. She assumed everyone would fold like nervous civilians. Instead, she'd accidentally welded together a community that had quietly minded its own business for decades. The scent of charcoal and honest conversation drifted over the lake, blending with pine-sweet night air that still meant home. Tomorrow would bring fresh battles, but tonight the good guys were ahead. Thursday. Dawn brought a surprise no cup of coffee could soften. The sacred first sip of the day had just hit my lips when the crunch of patrol car tires on gravel shattered the lake's calm. Blue lights flickered across my cabin walls like a twisted aurora, and I could practically feel Belinda's smugness radiating from across the water. 2 officers stepped out of their cruiser, both wearing the look of men who'd rather be anywhere else. The younger one had that bright-eyed belief that every 911 call was a crisis. His partner, a grizzled sergeant with stripes on his sleeve and the weary face of someone who'd seen every flavor of human nonsense, clearly knew this would be another waste of taxpayer dollars. "Mr. Lucas, we've had reports of you trespassing on private property and making threatening remarks toward a female resident. I invited them in for coffee, because if you're going to be falsely accused at sunrise, you might as well stay civilized." Sergeant Patterson, according to his badge, accepted gratefully, probably because he knew department coffee tastes like budget cuts mixed with regret. "Sir, we respond every call," Patterson said, settling into my grandfather's old kitchen chair that groaned like a ship in a storm. "But between you and me, this one doesn't pass the smell test." That's when I brought out my secret weapon. A mountain of documentation, security footage, property deeds, a detailed timeline of Belinda's harassment campaign, and even a written statement from Tim, the code enforcement officer she had tried to bribe. The Army had taught me that paperwork wins battles, and this one was about to get very lopsided. Patterson reviewed the footage of my supposed threats, which showed me helping elderly Florence load fishing gear into her car while Belinda lurked behind her windows like a low-budget spy novel villain. The alleged trespassing took place on a public access road that had been public since before Belinda was born, despite the shiny new private property signs she'd hammered up overnight like some kind of legal fairy. "Sir," Patterson muttered, shaking his head at the footage, "either you're the world's politest terrorist or someone's been yanking our chain." While the officers reviewed my evidence, my phone rang. Dave Mitchell, a private investigator who moonlighted at the local bait shop and looked like he could arm wrestle a bear, had finished the background check I'd hired him for. What he found would have made a soap opera writer jealous. Belinda owed $47,000 in unpaid HOA fees from her previous community in Minneapolis. The irony was thick enough to serve at the county fair. She'd been sued by that HOA and lost, explaining her deep familiarity with legal intimidation tactics. Even worse, she owed money to everyone from contractors to credit card companies, with a clear pattern of using legal threats to stall payments until creditors gave up or settled for pennies. But the real bombshell? Her rental operation violated 3 separate zoning ordinances, none of which she had the proper licenses for. The county had no record of her business at all, meaning she'd been operating illegally while preaching about community standards. The Truth Squad had grown to 15 residents, each with their own Belinda nightmare. Tom at the marina revealed she owed $3,200 in dock fees and threatened to sue him for discrimination when he demanded payment. The hardware store owner shared security footage of Belinda disputing charges for supplies she never returned, claiming they were defective. The pattern was clear as the lake on a still morning. Belinda weaponized legal intimidation to dodge debts, hoping people would rather walk away than fight her in court. Patterson finished reviewing my evidence and shook his head like a man who'd been chasing ghosts. "Mr. Lucas, I strongly advise you to consider pressing charges for filing false police reports. She's been using us as her personal enforcers, and that ends today." As the officers drove off, their tires crunching like a victory drumroll, I caught Belinda's silhouette vanish from her mansion window. The morning mist lifted off the lake, carrying the clean scent of pine and possibility. My attorney had scheduled a meeting for the next morning, promising news that would change everything. Something in his voice hinted that Belinda's house of cards was about to collapse in ways she couldn't imagine. The loons called across the water, their haunting cries mixing with the distant sounds of normal people starting their day without lawsuits or bribery. Arthur Preston had been my grandfather's lawyer since Carter was president, and at 78, he still dressed like he was arguing before the Supreme Court. His office smelled like old leather and expensive cigars, with law books stacked so high they looked ready to topple and bury careless clients under centuries of precedent. "Lucas, you'll want to sit down for this," Arthur said, adjusting wire-rimmed glasses that looked like they'd witnessed the signing of the Constitution. "I've been reviewing your grandfather's estate more carefully, and we missed something." He spread documents across his mahogany desk like a man revealing a royal flush. Property deeds, trust agreements, incorporation papers, all bearing signatures and dates I'd never seen before. "When your grandfather passed, you inherited more than the cabin," Arthur continued, in that careful tone lawyers use before dropping bombshells. In 1987, he created Northwoods Property Trust as a tax shelter. You now own a 60% controlling interest in a trust that holds 4 lakefront properties. My mug froze halfway to my lips. 4 properties, including the $800,000 mansion currently occupied by one Belinda Cartwright. The realization hit like a slap with a wet fish. I'd been fighting my own tenant without knowing it. For 3 years, Belinda had been paying rent to a property management company that deposited the payments into an account I never knew existed. The woman who'd been terrorizing me about property standards was literally putting money in my pocket every month. Arthur slid a lease agreement thick enough to stop a bullet across the desk. Your grandfather was thorough. This lease includes clauses about peaceful enjoyment of neighboring properties, bans on unlicensed business activity, and requirements for maintaining community harmony. Miss Cartwright has violated about 14 different terms. The irony was almost divine. Belinda had been harassing her own landlord while falling behind on rent, running illegal businesses, and disturbing other tenants in the same property trust. How behind is she? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. 2 months with late fees piling up. The property management company is preparing eviction proceedings, but they need trust approval. That's you. I stared at the documents, my mind racing through 3 years of deposits I'd dismissed as part of the inheritance. Suddenly, Belinda's desperation made perfect sense. She wasn't just facing harassment complaints and zoning violations. She was about to lose the home base of her entire rental scheme. Arthur, she doesn't know I'm her landlord, does she? His weathered face broke into a smile fit for a courtroom victory photo. Not unless she's a lot smarter than her behavior suggests. The strategic implications hit me like a tactical revelation. I could evict Belinda immediately for violating her lease, but that felt like winning on a technicality rather than on principle. My grandfather had always said that real strength lies in knowing when not to pull the trigger. What would you suggest? I asked. Arthur leaned back in his chair, which creaked like an old ship riding out a storm. Give her one final chance to fix this. Document everything. Offer mediation. Show the court you tried to resolve things reasonably. Judges appreciate landlords who exhaust peaceful options before dropping the hammer. But if she pushed further, Arthur tapped the eviction notice already drafted. 30 days to vacate for multiple lease breaches. Clean, legal, and devastating to her financial house of cards. I left Arthur's office feeling like I'd discovered I'd been playing chess while everyone else thought it was checkers. The afternoon sun bathed Main Street in gold, and for the first time in months, I felt like maybe the universe had a sense of humor. Belinda Cartwright, HOA dictator and vacation rental queen, had been paying her worst enemy to let her destroy his peace and quiet. Sometimes the best revenge is realizing you held all the cards from the start. That feeling was like realizing you'd been holding the IKEA instructions upside down for hours, except instead of a wobbly bookshelf, I'd accidentally become my worst enemy's landlord. It was time to build a case Perry Mason would envy. Arthur became my strategist, channeling decades of courtroom wisdom into what he called the nuclear option playbook. His office turned into mission control, manila folders covering every surface like legal kudzu. He explained landlord-tenant law like coaching a football team. You set clear rules. They follow them, or get benched. No personal grudges, just consequences for documented violations. Dave Mitchell, my private investigator, who could probably track a ghost through a snowstorm, brought his final report with the satisfaction of a man who'd struck oil. Belinda owed $73,000 to multiple creditors, had tax liens pending on her former Minneapolis property, and a credit score that made subprime loans look attractive. Here's something viewers should know, Dave said, sliding papers across Arthur's desk. Most counties let you search public records online for liens, judgments, and tax issues. It's free, and knowledge is power in disputes. Janet, our retired librarian turned intelligence officer, organized the community documentation with Pentagon-level efficiency. Her 3-ring binder contained time-stamped photos, witness statements, and a cross-referenced index of Belinda's harassment incidents that read like a criminal psychology text. The marina owners got receipts for unpaid bills and photocopies of bounced checks, Janet reported, adjusting glasses that had seen more neighborhood drama than a soap opera. Local contractors shared identical stories of payment disputes followed by legal threats. Deputy Ruiz, tracking complaint patterns with the dedication of a bloodhound on a bacon trail, offered advice straddling the line between official and friendly. "Document everything," he said, leaning against Arthur's filing cabinet. "Courts want to see that reasonable people tried reasonable solutions before it blew up." The prep felt like planning a military operation. If military ops involved elderly librarians and small-town lawyers plotting the downfall of a rental empire. I installed more security cameras, now with audio, because apparently my land was more surveilled than a courthouse. Security cameras with audio are legal on your own property in most states, Arthur noted, flipping through a statute book thick enough to stop a bullet. Always verify local laws, but documented evidence beats he said, she said. We drafted what Arthur called the escalation protocol, a step-by-step plan giving Belinda every chance to save face while recording her refusal to act reasonably. First, I'd approach her as a concerned neighbor, offering mediation through county services. If she refused or escalated, we'd publicly reveal the landlord connection at the next town council meeting. Janet studied Robert's Rules of Order like she was prepping for a Senate hearing, while Arthur prepared legal notices for every possible outcome. He even had contingency plans for his contingency plans, ranging from zoning enforcement to potential criminal charges for false police reports. Always give people a face-saving way out, Arthur advised, organizing documents like a monk illuminating manuscripts. Courts appreciate parties who try to resolve things, and juries despise bullies who refuse reasonable offers. The Truth Squad had evolved into a neighborhood watch the NSA might envy. 15 residents coordinated through our chat, sharing real-time updates on Belinda's increasingly erratic antics. Tom at the marina agreed to log future incidents, while local businesses promised to back our paper trail with their own documentation. We even lined up media contacts in case the story hit public interest levels. The town newspaper editor was already sniffing around after hearing whispers of bribery attempts and zoning violations. The community protection effort felt like something out of a feel-good film, except with more legal paperwork and fewer musical numbers. Elderly neighbors installed cameras after Belinda's intimidation visits, and Truth Squad members began escorting vulnerable residents on errands to avoid confrontations. As I sat in Arthur's office that night, surrounded by evidence folders, the smell of old law books mixing with Janet's homemade cookies and Dave's cigar smoke, I realized we'd accidentally created something beautiful, a community that refused to be bullied. Tomorrow, I'd give Belinda one final chance to choose dignity over destruction. After that, the nuclear option was primed and ready. If Belinda thought my growing community support was just small talk, she clearly hadn't noticed the tactical situation closing in around her. Desperate people make spectacularly poor decisions when cornered, and Belinda was no exception. The sabotage started subtly, which should have been my first clue that she'd graduated from amateur harassment to actual criminal behavior. She stalked our Truth Squad's activity through fake Facebook profiles, gathering intel and spreading counter-narratives about my supposed instability. Then, one Tuesday night, my cameras caught something that made my military paranoia seem like casual concern. At 2:17 a.m., a pickup matching her handyman's vehicle crept past my dock like a suburban stealth mission gone wrong. The driver wore a baseball cap low, but the license plate glowed clearly under my new LED floodlights. By Wednesday morning, I had a surprise that would have ruined my day if I hadn't learned to expect the worst from people drenched in perfume and legal threats. My fishing boat sat half-submerged at the dock, looking like a maritime crime scene. The drain plug had been removed, not loose, not broken, just gone. $2,800 in damage to the motor and electronics, plus tackle gear that had been in my family longer than Belinda had been alive. The smell of lake water mixed with oil and gasoline into an aromatic cocktail that screamed insurance claim and felony charges. But here's where Belinda's desperation betrayed her ignorance of how evidence works today. My security cameras had captured everything in high-definition detail, complete with audio of her handyman muttering about crazy lady jobs as he worked. I filed the police report with the precision of someone who'd been logging harassment for months. Deputy Ruiz arrived within the hour, took one look at the footage, and shook his head like a man watching tax dollars circle the drain. "This crossed a line," he said, examining the missing drain plug. "Property damage over $1,000 is a felony. Your electronics alone put this into serious criminal territory." While I was juggling insurance adjusters and marine mechanics, Belinda was apparently staging her own unraveling across the lake. Truth Squad members reported behavior so erratic it made her previous harassment look like polite conversation. She started approaching elderly neighbors with the subtlety of a door-to-door cult recruiter, demanding they pick sides in what she called the lake war. Florence, bless her 90-year-old heart, told Belinda exactly where she could shove her loyalty demands, using language that would make a sailor blush and a Sunday school teacher take notes. Tom at the marina finally banned her from the fuel dock after she screamed at a teenage employee about a conspiracy to overcharge successful businesswomen. The kid was making $8 an hour and probably couldn't spell conspiracy, much less orchestrate one. Then came the grocery store meltdown, which became local legend in less than a day. Belinda accused the cashier of overcharging her and demanded to speak to corporate about systematic harassment of professionals. The manager, a patient woman who'd seen everything from coupon scams to Christmas chaos, asked her to leave after she started filming other shoppers and shouting about witnesses. But the real goldmine came from Janet's deep dive research into Belinda's residential history, stretching back 8 years. The pattern was identical at every address. Neighbor disputes escalating to harassment complaints, accusations of unstable and dangerous behavior aimed at anyone who challenged her, and eventual departure under legal pressure. Previous landlords described the same escalation cycle, often ending in eviction. One Minneapolis property manager had documented a restraining order after Belinda threatened to destroy a neighbor who complained about her unlicensed dog breeding operation. Another complex had footage of her keying cars belonging to residents who'd reported noise violations. Meanwhile, our silent prep ramped up like a military operation approaching D-Day. Arthur filed a restraining order detailing the property damage and harassment pattern. We coordinated with the insurance investigator about possible fraud charges, since Belinda's handyman had conveniently developed selective amnesia about his late-night marina job. Pressure was building from every direction. Online reviews for Belinda's vacation rentals started mentioning unstable management and ongoing legal issues, causing her booking rates to nosedive faster than her credit score. The property management company received formal complaints about tenant behavior violating community standards. County zoning authorities launched a formal probe into her unlicensed business, and the local newspaper began sniffing around corruption allegations and harassment patterns. As I sat on my repaired dock that evening, listening to gentle waves lapping against fresh bumpers and breathing in air scented like victory mixed with pine, I realized Belinda had made her final mistake. She'd turned harassment into documented evidence that would bury her in court. When desperate people run out of legal moves, they usually do one of two things: accept defeat gracefully or double down on stupidity until they achieve legendary status. Belinda, being Belinda, chose door number 2 with the enthusiasm of a kamikaze pilot heading for an aircraft carrier. What followed would have been hilarious if it weren't so criminal. County Commissioner Bill Harlan had served Maple Ridge for 12 years without a single ethics complaint, which made Belinda's approach about as welcome as a tornado at a church picnic. According to Bill's later statement, she strutted into his office with a designer purse and the kind of confidence that comes from inhaling your own entitlement. "Commissioner Harlan, I have a proposition that could benefit us both," she announced, sliding an envelope across his desk like she was buying state secrets rather than trying to bribe a small-town official who probably made less than her monthly shoe budget. Inside, $5,000 in cash for consulting services about the environmental hazard that was my property. She even used air quotes while suggesting my grandfather's cabin should be condemned as a lake pollution threat. Bill had been in politics long enough to spot corruption when it strutted into his office in white capris and desperation perfume. He immediately reported the bribe attempt to the district attorney, triggering an investigation that would make Watergate look like a parking dispute. But Belinda didn't stop there. She tried the same stunt with the zoning inspector, and he wore a wire on their second meeting. The recording was so clear you could hear her jewelry jingle as she counted out bills while saying, I needed to be relocated for community safety. Deputy Ruiz documented her bribery attempt in a report that could serve as a textbook example of how not to influence law enforcement. She had turned a neighborhood spat into a potential felony case faster than you could say corruption conspiracy. When Arthur called about the DA's investigation, his voice carried that special tone lawyers use when trying not to sound too pleased. Lucas, she's facing potential prison time. Bribing public officials is a felony with serious consequences. I felt conflicted in a way my military training hadn't prepared me for. I'd wanted justice, not to watch someone's life implode. But Belinda had crossed a line, transforming a property dispute into criminal territory. And there was no putting that toothpaste back in the tube. The local newspaper editor, who'd been tracking the story like a bloodhound on a bacon trail, reached out for an interview. "This goes beyond a neighborhood spat," she said. "Corruption allegations are newsworthy, and the community deserves to know." The media attention triggered Belinda's final public meltdown, which unfolded at the boat launch before 27 witnesses who thought they were just there to fish, not watch a live soap opera. "This is all a conspiracy," she screamed, pointing at me with enough venom to kill a small animal. "He stalked and terrorized me for months. I demand he pay my legal fees and moving expenses." The accusation was so absurd that several witnesses laughed out loud. Florence, who was loading fishing gear with the calm of someone who'd outlived 3 husbands and 2 presidents, finally spoke up with the authority of someone who'd earned the right to be blunt. "Honey, I've lived on this lake for 60 years and you're the problem. That boy hasn't done anything but fish and mind his business while you've been running around threatening lawsuits like some kind of legal terrorist." The crowd nodded in agreement like a Greek chorus of common sense, and several people pulled out phones to record what they knew would become social media gold. Belinda realized she'd lost all community support and stormed off, threatening to hire real lawyers with money she clearly didn't have. That evening, Arthur advised me to reveal the landlord connection publicly at the next town council meeting. "It's time to end this before she hurts herself or someone else more seriously," he said, organizing documents with the precision of a man planning a courtroom victory. "Her criminal behavior has forced your hand." Word spread through town faster than gossip at church potluck. The county attorney would attend to observe witness testimony, and the regional newspaper sent a reporter after hearing about a corruption probe in small-town America. As I sat on my dock that night, listening to loons calling across water that reflected stars and possibility, I realized Belinda had given me something I never expected: the moral high ground in a community that refused to be bullied. Tomorrow, the truth would finally get its day, if not in court, then at least in the high school gym. If you've never seen 300 small-town residents pack a high school gym for what was supposed to be a routine council meeting, you're missing out on democracy's greatest spectator sport. The energy felt like a championship game crossed with a public trial, except the popcorn was homemade and the drama was real. Local businesses closed early so owners could attend what everyone called the Great Lake Showdown. The regional news crew set up cameras like they were covering a presidential debate, while county officials filled the back row with the grim satisfaction of people about to see justice served. Belinda arrived fashionably late with her Twin Cities lawyer, a slick man in a $1,000 suit who probably billed more per hour than most folks earned in a week. She wore a white power suit that screamed, "I'm important." But her nervous energy betrayed that she knew the walls were closing in. I approached the podium calmer than I'd been in months, carrying a manila folder heavy enough to sink a battleship. The gym fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and someone's stomach growling. "Thank you all for coming," I began, looking out at faces that had become friends over the last few months. 3 months ago, I thought I was dealing with a simple neighbor dispute. Tonight, I want to share what I've actually discovered. Arthur's presentation could have made a Fortune 500 boardroom jealous. Property ownership records filled the projector screen in letters large enough to read from the parking lot. The crowd gasped as one, like 300 people realizing they'd been watching a magic trick in reverse. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've been Belinda Cartwright's landlord for the past 3 years, without knowing it." The gym erupted like a stadium after a championship touchdown. Applause, laughter, and more than a few "I knew it" shouts echoed off the rafters as Belinda's face cycled through more colors than a mood ring in a microwave. Arthur's timeline of lease violations rolled out like a greatest hits album of tenant nightmares. Security footage of the boat sabotage drew boos, while audio of bribery attempts made the county attorney sit up straighter and scribble notes that looked suspiciously like arrest warrants. Belinda's lawyer tried damage control with the desperation of someone plugging a dam with chewing gum. My client was unaware of the ownership structure and acted in good faith to protect community standards. The laughter was so loud it probably registered on seismographs in the next county. Florence, sitting in the front row with the confidence of someone who'd earned the right to speak truth, shouted, "Good faith, my foot," loud enough to make the pastor cover his ears and the reporter scribble faster. Financial records showing unpaid bills and fraudulent business dealings scrolled across the screen like a criminal case study in spreadsheet form. Business owners spoke openly about her creative payment avoidance tactics, while Tom from the marina held up copies of bounced checks like evidence in a trial. That's when I delivered the line I'd practiced in the bathroom mirror for 3 days. "Miss Cartwright, I offered you respect as a neighbor and reason as a community member. You chose intimidation, harassment, and criminal acts instead." I held up the official eviction notice, crisp and devastating. "As your landlord, I'm giving you 30 days to vacate for multiple lease violations. This could have been handled privately and respectfully." The standing ovation lasted so long I thought the fire marshal might issue noise citations. Florence led the applause like a maestro conducting an orchestra, while Truth Squad members wiped away tears of joy, or relief, or both. Belinda shot to her feet with the flair of someone who'd been rehearsing courtroom speeches in the mirror. "This is all lies and conspiracy," she shouted, pointing at me with venom. "He's bought off law enforcement and the media. This is harassment and discrimination." Deputy Ruiz moved closer as her voice climbed past indoor acceptable. Her lawyer physically restrained her from storming the podium, probably saving her from additional charges for public disturbance or attempted assault. The TV reporter interviewed me afterward with softball questions lobbed like from a proud grandmother. "What advice do you have for others facing HOA abuse?" "Document everything. Know your rights. And remember, bullies only win when good people stay silent." The next day's headline read, "Lake Dispute Exposes Bribery Scheme." Suddenly, our little neighborhood drama became a cautionary tale about power, corruption, and the importance of reading your property deeds carefully. As the crowd filed out, buzzing like excited teenagers after a concert, I realized we'd created something beautiful, a community that refused to bow to bullies, no matter how loud they shouted about their importance. Belinda vanished from Silver Pine Lake faster than a bad check clears, stuffing her designer luggage and bruised ego into a U-Haul bound for Florida within 2 weeks. She left behind a forwarding address that probably wouldn't last 6 months and property damage that looked like a frat house after spring break. The criminal case wrapped up with small-town efficiency. Belinda took a plea deal, probation and 200 hours of community service, an ironic punishment for someone who'd spent months tormenting her actual community. Her pricey lawyer likely charged more for the plea deal than most locals earned in a year, but justice came with a side of financial consequences. I never planned on becoming Maple Ridge's accidental community organizer, but apparently, defending your fishing rights qualifies you for leadership roles you never asked for. The Silver Pine Advisory Committee grew naturally from our Truth Squad, setting sensible community standards without the petty tyranny that plagues traditional HOAs. We partnered with county environmental agencies on lake conservation, launched a neighborhood watch focused on real crime instead of unauthorized bird feeders, and created mediation services for disputes that didn't need lawyers or police. The real magic came when I decided how to invest 3 years of surprise rental income. The Silver Pine Community Scholarship Fund was born with a radical idea: reward local kids who value service over harassment. Every spring, we award scholarships to students pursuing environmental science, law, or public service. Our annual fundraiser is now Maple Ridge's premier social event, featuring fish fry that tastes like heaven, live bluegrass, and storytelling contests where neighbors share Remember Belinda tales with the affection usually reserved for survived natural disasters. Florence won last year's contest with her Oscar-worthy reenactment of telling Belinda exactly where to stick her loyalty demands complete with gestures that made firefighters blush and inspired the pastor's sermon on righteous anger. Healing came like a Minnesota spring, slowly, then all at once, bringing life back to places I'd forgotten could bloom. The peace I'd sought arrived with unexpected gifts, real friendships forged in resistance and neighbors who proved they'd stand together when bullies tried to divide them. Janet and I started dating around Christmas, bonded by our shared love of proper documentation and her talent for organizing neighborhood revolutions. Turns out librarians make excellent partners when they're not busy dismantling rental empires with research skills. I rediscovered my grandfather's woodworking shop, building picnic tables for public lake access and teaching kids how to make things instead of lawsuits. There's profound satisfaction in creating beauty from raw wood, especially after months dealing with someone who created chaos from pure entitlement. Our lake conservation project became a statewide model for community stewardship. Weekend cleanups remove invasive species, and elementary students now monitor water quality, learning that protecting nature requires cooperation, not litigation. State agencies showcase Silver Pine Lake as proof that communities can achieve remarkable things when they work together. 3 hard-earned lessons every homeowner should know. First, research deed restrictions before buying. Most HOA rules are unenforceable fantasies dreamed up by people with law degrees from Google. Second, public records searches reveal liens, judgments, and business licenses. Knowledge crushes intimidation every time. Third, cameras and documentation beat harassment better than any lawyer, so invest in good gear and learn your state's recording laws. Media coverage turned our drama into inspiration for communities nationwide fighting HOA tyranny. I've appeared on property rights podcasts, spoken at municipal meetings about harassment prevention, and somehow become a reluctant champion for ordinary people refusing to surrender their peace to bureaucratic bullies. Last week, Janet mentioned her sister's fight with predatory towing companies targeting vulnerable drivers in Duluth. Same intimidation playbook, she said, showing documentation that set off my well-honed bully radar. Interesting, I replied, sipping coffee that tasted like victory and possibility. Dave Mitchell's investigative services are still available. This morning, as the sunrise painted Silver Pine Lake gold and loons called across peaceful water, I heard my grandfather's words echo in my mind. Sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone. The smell of pine needles mixed with fresh coffee and the promise of another day in a community that learned how to fight back against those who mistake authority for permission to abuse others. If you've survived your own HOA nightmare, share your story in the comments. Together, we can help others win their battles too. And if you enjoyed watching justice triumph over entitlement with a satisfying dose of poetic karma, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more HOA stories, where neighborhood tyrants finally meet their match.